The NCAA tournament has now ended with UConn winning their second title in a row. But I'm going to talk about why a player in Zach Edey has probably increased his value the most in the draft than any other player who played in the tournament. We're going to talk about all that and more right after this.
Welcome to the number one place for your daily basketball news and analysis, NBA Central.
What's going on, basketball fans? Welcome to another episode of NBA Central, your number one spot for everything basketball related. I'm the host here, Haize, but more importantly, you guys can follow the channel at NBA Central Pod on every social media platform we happen to be on. With that being said, let's go ahead and get into it for today. So I want to talk about a player that had tons of doubt surrounding him, right? And that's Zach Edey. Zach Edey, who just a couple of months ago, or maybe even not a couple of months, just a month ago, a lot of mock drafts had Zach Edey slated to potentially not even be drafted, or if he was, drafted late in the second round. Now, when you look at most mocks now after the NCAA tournament, a lot of that has now changed for Zach Edey. And the questions around Zach Edey are legitimate. When you look at his raw numbers in his last 2 years in college basketball, he averaged 22.3 points per game his junior year, 25.2 points per game his senior year, averaged over 2 blocks per game in both those years as well, and 1.5 steals his junior year and 2 assists his senior year. Also, when you look at the rebounding number, 13 rebounds per game he basically averaged in his junior year. That came down a little bit to 12.2 in his senior year as well. And he's a career 62% shooter from the field overall as well. Now, while Zach Edey is not the most modern type center, he's not a threat to stretch the floor at all, Zach Edey has always been one of the better college players in the nation, right? But it's always a thing where you look at, there's just some players who game, no matter how good they are at college, just do not translate to the NBA level. Now, Zach Edey was one of those players that came into that. Even so, earlier in the tournament, Kenny Smith saying that, yeah, Zach Edey could not be drafted, but a team could draft him if they want to commit to playing old school type basketball for a few minutes a game. But Zach Edey has done a lot. When you look at it now, from being a player that some mocks had not even going drafted to some having him late in the second round, a handful of mocks now have Zach Edey being drafted late in the first round. There has not been a single player to help increase their draft stock more than Zach Edey did in the 2024 NCAA tournament. Now, there's still some legitimate concerns around him. When you look at Zach Edey, 7'4", 300 pounds, 21 years old, he's a young player that has shown the ability to be a back-to-the-basket scorer in a league, though, he's coming to a league now in the NBA that has prioritized that less and less. While you've seen players who are slower, older kind of style centers like a Jokic, I'm not in any way comparing Zach Edey to Jokic at all, right? Because he's not nearly the passer Jokic could be. But you see some players be able to still do that, right? But in a league now that has prioritized switchability, the ability to stretch the floor, even as a center out to at least 12 to 15 feet, is something that most teams value now more than ever. But when you look at the combination of height that Zach Edey has, right? 7'4", the fact that he has the touch around the rim, to even able to go one-handed, he can deal with the physicality of the NBA level, especially when you're looking at that 300-pound frame that he has. And then you see him go up against a player like Donovan Clingan, right? A player who Donovan Clingan has always been kind of projected to be drafted in this draft. And these are two kind of more older style centers that now most mocks have going in the first round of this one. When it comes down to it, you can see where Zach Edey fits on the offensive side of the ball, right? Especially in pick and roll situations, ball screen situations. But if you pull Zach Edey away from the basket, it's going to be one of those things where you're definitely going to get concerned over how well he's going to be able to do that in a league where switchability is prioritized at an all-time high. Or if you can't switch, you have to be able to just be that good at rim protection. Zach Edey is going to be a player that it's going to be interesting to see what team takes a shot at Zach Edey and what the style of that team is and how they plan on implementing and using Zach Edey in their offensive and defensive system. Make no mistake about it. While the mocks have Zach Edey now going maybe in that first round, he's still a player that very well, no matter where he's drafted, could still end up being out of the NBA a few years after being drafted if he does not adapt well or if he doesn't go to a team that understands exactly how they want to use Zach Edey in the more modern type NBA. Now, I know a lot of people hold out hope that we can see the NBA go back to a more kind of old school style when it comes to how they use their big men and prioritize the big man yet again. And I'm not saying that may not happen at some time, but when you look at the mobile, athletic big men that are coming into the league, you got to have some questions on that. And while, mocks like Bleacher Report, CBS Sports do have Zach Edey going at the end of the first round, make no mistake about it. Once the draft combine comes around, and Zach Edey's actually put out there in competitions and things, you could see his stock fall right back to where it was before. And that's the thing that you have to look at when it comes down to it as well, where this is going to go. And so, for one, I'm never anyone to hope that a player crashes and burns, nothing like that. It's not ever personal when it comes to that. But there is something to be said about the fact that teams just typically do not go for players like Zach Edey anymore. Hell, we just saw a player last season like Kofi Cockburn, a player who had a great collegiate career, right? And was old school, rim protection, blocking shots, things like that. Even Adama Sanogo to a degree as well, going undrafted. Now, he was signed and kind of dominated the G League as well. Even he's a little bit more mobile when it comes to that. But there are a lot of questions around just how good Zach Edey can be. And Zach Edey, for all we know, still a very young player, could really surprise some people when it comes down to it. But I still look at it and I say this, man. If Zach Edey is drafted in the end of the first round, it's going to be interesting to see what his future becomes at the NBA level, because he's not one of those players that just has a clear cut. And while some of the outlets like CBS Sports have him going 22nd overall, US Today now have him going 26th overall, Bleacher Reports have him going 30 overall, you still have the places like NBADraft.net, 37th overall, which will push him to the second round, things like that. Zach Edey now, the space in which he can go, it went from being a player earlier in the year that people thought just was not going to be an NBA caliber player to people recognizing that he has talent. And even though there are concerns about the physicality, how he's going to be able to deal with that, how he's going to be able to deal with the quicker players that he's going to have to face. But if you draft Zach Edey and you're a team that needs some bench depth, needs some size off the bench, and can commit to playing a certain style when Zach Edey's on the court and on the floor, much less him kind of develop and understanding the timing and thing that's needed when you're not the quickest player of foot, Zach Edey is going to be a really interesting prospect to watch in this year's 2024 NBA draft. But let me know what you guys think down below. Do you think that Zach Edey is a player that should be drafted towards the end of the first round, considering his collegiate career and just how good he was in college basketball? Do you look at him as a player that you just don't see or you think is going to end up fizzling out, maybe spending some time in the G League before kind of riding off maybe into Europe or something like that? Or do you think that Zach Edey could be one of those players that bucks the trend and ends up turning himself into at least a solid enough NBA player to where that the upsides that he does have, because there are upsides there, are going to be able to outweigh the potential downsides of drafting Zach Edey for the modern NBA? Let me know what you guys think on all that down below. Make sure you guys are following the show at NBA Central on every social media platform. You can also send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns, NBACentral@gmail.com, NBA Central Show at gmail.com. And then lastly, if you want to leave a text message and our voicemail, the number to do so, 773-270-2799. We're the number one spot for everything basketball related. And I'll see you guys the next time I feel like making a video. Probably tomorrow. Peace, y'all.
This has been a presentation of the Breaks Media.